the aftermath of the federal election, which reduced the Trudeau government from a tight majority to minority status, he was essentially shut out in Western Canada, and a grassroots Western separatist movement called Wexit has formed. You'd almost think that the Prime Minister might think that uniting a divided nation would be a priority. Almost. Add to that the dire strait of the national economy. The PBO released a projection saying that this year the country will pay $23.8 billion in interest payments alone to service the national debt. They project that number will rise to $33.6 billion in 5 years. Stunning numbers. The GDP is barely limping along in positive territory and is just a hiccup or two away from falling into a recession. Over the course of his first term in office, Canada has lost over $100 billion in investment we might otherwise have had, but for the disastrous policies of the Prime Minister and his Liberal government. Our National Railway has just gone on strike, which will affect getting Alberta oil to market and prairie grain to the West Coast terminals, not to mention not being able to transport Eastern manufacturing to market, including cars produced in Ontario. In short, a prolonged strike could cripple the Canadian economy for a lengthy period of time. With all that facing the Prime Minister as he prepared to name his new cabinet, one would think he'd be hard at work addressing those issues for the good of the country. His stated priority, he said, is fighting climate change. He also reversed course at the UN, siding with a bunch of despotic countries and backing the Palestinians against Israeli settlements on the West Bank, in a motion siding with the likes of North Korea, Egypt, Zimbabwe, and Nicaragua, and directly against the United States, our closest ally and largest trading partner. The mind boggles. So desperate is the Prime Minister to do the UN's bidding to get invited for a seat on the Security Council that he would stick his finger in the eye of Donald Trump. Which brings me to his new cabinet, just announced. He had the opportunity to make some appointments that might signal business and the West that he is going to be inclusive and that his government is going to do everything possible to right the listing ship. He did nothing of the kind. He started by appointing former Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland as Deputy Prime Minister, essentially his second in command. But what that really does is provide a buffer to further insulate him from anyone trying to get the attention of the PMO. Freeland has, charitably, a checkered history as the Foreign Affairs Minister. She managed to anger the Saudis, China, and other countries we used to have good relations with. Add to that she was made persona non grata by Russia, meaning she can't go there. It's pretty hard to conduct diplomacy if you can't travel to that country and they won't even take your calls. With the election loss of Ralph Goodale, he appointed the former chief of the Toronto Police Service, the sycophantic Bill Blair, as his public safety minister, which means he is responsible for the RCMP. One wonders what might happen to their investigation into the Prime Minister for obstruction of justice for his role in the SNC-Lavalin scandal that was paused at the start of the election campaign. He also created a new ministry, Middle Class Prosperity, and named Mona Fortier to the post. Prior to being an MP, she was the Director of Communications for an obscure Ottawa French language community college. Her resume is even thinner than the Prime Minister's. Considering it is the Prime Minister's carbon tax and other taxes that have hurt the middle class, one wonders exactly what her role might be. And then there's the appointment of Mark Miller as Minister of Indigenous Services. Miller attended College Jean de Brebeuf with the Prime Minister in the 80s. He helped organize Trudeau's first political campaign when he ran and won a seat in Parliament. He was also the fundraising director for Trudeau's leadership campaign and hosted a secret Liberal fundraiser in New York City in October during the election. Let's not forget Marianne Monsef, the newly appointed Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Rural Development. Not sure the connection. Seriously though. Monsef, who has mused about her fascination with Sharia law, which espouses things like female genital mutilation, men beating women, and the subjugation of women, seems like a perfect choice. But the worst decision among many was the appointment of Seamus O'Regan to the position of Minister of Natural Resources, which puts him in a position of responsibility for our energy sector, which accounts for 15% of the country's GDP. His qualifications? Well, he's gay and a recovering alcoholic and a longtime friend of the Prime Minister who was in the wedding party when the Prime Minister got married. He spent a decade or so as host of the lightweight CTV morning show and failed utterly in his two prior cabinet positions, Veteran Affairs and latterly Indigenous Affairs. Ask the folks of Grassy Narrows First Nations, who are still coping with mercury-poisoned water, just how good he did at that position. Instead of making decisions to unite the country and giving the oil and gas industry some hope for recovery, he might as well have thrown gasoline on the fire started by the Wexit movement. The incompetence is stunning. For True North, I'm Leo Knight.